Right now, as you're watching this video, there's a good chance someone in your life is controlling your decisions without you even realizing it. They're not using force. They're not raising their voice. In fact, they might be smiling while they do it. According to research from Cornell University, the average person makes over 35,000 decisions every single day. But here's the disturbing part. Psychological studies suggest that up to 70% of those decisions are influenced by external manipulation tactics we never consciously detect. That colleague who always seems to get their way. That friend who makes you feel guilty for saying no. That partner who somehow always turns the argument around until you're apologizing for something you didn't do. These aren't accidents. These are calculated patterns. And the most dangerous manipulators, they've mastered the art of making you believe every choice was yours all along. By the end of this video, you'll never look at certain behaviors the same way again. Because what you're about to discover doesn't just happen in toxic relationships or corporate boardrooms. It's happening in your life right now. And you're about to see exactly how. Manipulation is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in psychology. When most people hear the word, they picture obvious villains, cartoon bad guys twirling their mustaches and plotting elaborate schemes. But real manipulation is far more subtle, far more common, and far more damaging than most of us realize. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a warning label. It disguises itself as care, as friendship, as love, as professional advice. Dr. George Simon, a leading clinical psychologist specializing in manipulative behavior, has spent over 3 decades studying how certain individuals gain control over others. His research reveals something chilling. Master manipulators don't see people as human beings with their own needs and boundaries. They see them as instruments, as tools to be used for personal gain. And they've developed a sophisticated toolkit of psychological tactics that work beneath the level of conscious awareness. Here's why this matters to you personally. Every single day, you interact with dozens of people, each with their own agendas, needs, and desires. Most of these interactions are healthy and reciprocal, but some are not. Some people have learned, whether consciously or unconsciously, how to exploit the fundamental principles of human psychology to get what they want. They figured out how to bypass your rational mind and speak directly to your emotions, your insecurities, your deepest needs for belonging and validation. The difference between influence and manipulation comes down to one critical factor: intent and respect for autonomy. Healthy influence respects your right to choose. Manipulation seeks to take that choice away while making you believe you still have it. And once you understand the signs, once you can spot these patterns in real time, everything changes. You reclaim your power. You see the invisible strings before they're pulled. But here's what most psychology channels won't tell you. Recognizing these signs is just the beginning. The real question is, what do you do when you discover someone you trust has been manipulating you all along? Sign 1. The invisible scorekeeper. Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to have a perfect memory for every favor they've ever done for you, but somehow forget everything you've done for them? This isn't forgetfulness. This is manipulation through manufactured debt. The psychological principle at work here is called reciprocity obligation, and it's one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. Dr. Robert Cialdini's groundbreaking research in his book Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, demonstrates that humans are hardwired to feel compelled to return favors. It's a survival mechanism that helped our ancestors build cooperative communities. But manipulators have weaponized this instinct. Here's how it works in real life. Your friend offers to help you move. Great, right? Except 3 months later, when you can't make it to their party because you're genuinely sick, suddenly that favor gets brought up. After I spent my entire Saturday helping you move, you can't even make it to my party? Notice what just happened. A freely given favor has been retroactively transformed into a debt you didn't know you owed. And that debt comes with interest. The master manipulator keeps a mental ledger that's always tilted in their favor. They lose small favors without being asked, creating a sense of obligation you never requested. Then, when they need something, particularly something much larger than what they gave, they cash in. The brilliant part? You feel like the bad person for not reciprocating. Your own sense of fairness has been turned into a weapon against you. Research from the University of California found that people who feel indebted make decisions up to 40% faster and with significantly less critical thinking. Why? Because the discomfort of feeling like you owe someone creates a psychological pressure to resolve that tension quickly, even if the resolution isn't in your best interest. But here's what makes this particularly insidious. Genuine kindness exists. Real friends do favors without keeping score. So how do you tell the difference? Watch the pattern. Does this person bring up their helpfulness regularly? Do they seem to remember their contributions with crystal clarity while your efforts seem to evaporate from their memory? Do they offer help with a subtle undertone that suggests you'll owe them later? That's your first warning sign. And this is just the surface level of how manipulation works, because the tactics get far more sophisticated from here. Sign 2. The emotional puppet master. Let's talk about something that might make you uncomfortable. Think about the last time you had a disagreement with someone, and somehow, by the end of the conversation, you were the one apologizing, even though you're still not entirely sure what you did wrong. If this sounds familiar, you've experienced what psychologists call emotional manipulation through guilt induction. Dr. Harriet Breker, a renowned psychologist who specialized in manipulative relationships, identified guilt as the primary tool in the emotional manipulator's arsenal. Why? Because guilt is a uniquely powerful emotion. It bypasses logic entirely and speaks directly to our fundamental need to be good people. When we feel guilty, we'll do almost anything to relieve that feeling, even if rationally we know we've done nothing wrong. The emotional puppet master has mastered several specific phrases that trigger guilt on command. Listen for these. After everything I've done for you, I guess I just care more about this relationship than you do. You're being selfish. If you really loved me, you would. Each of these statements is engineered to make you question your own character, your own goodness. But the manipulation goes deeper than just words. There's a technique called emotional baiting that's particularly cruel. Here's how it plays out. You set a boundary. Maybe you say you can't work late again this week because you have personal commitments. A manipulator won't simply accept this. Instead, they'll respond with exaggerated emotional pain, heavy sighs, hurt expressions, comments like, I understand, I'll just have to handle it all myself. Again, notice what's happening. Your reasonable boundary has been reframed as you causing them suffering. And because you're a decent human being who doesn't want to hurt others, you feel pressure to abandon your boundary to relieve their apparent distress. Except their distress isn't genuine. It's a performance designed to control your behavior. Neurological research using fMRI scans has shown that when people experience guilt, the areas of the brain associated with pain actually light up. Guilt literally hurts. Manipulators instinctively understand this, even if they've never read a neuroscience paper in their lives. They've learned that making you feel emotional pain is the fastest route to compliance. Here's a real-world example that demonstrates this perfectly. A woman named Sarah shared her story in a psychology research interview. Her mother would call every single day, sometimes multiple times. When Sarah gently mentioned that she couldn't always answer because of work, her mother's response was telling, I understand, I am just your mother. I am sure your job is more important than the woman who gave birth to you. Sarah would feel terrible and end up answering calls during meetings, interrupting her workflow, damaging her professional reputation. It took years of therapy for Sarah to realize this wasn't love. This was control through manufactured guilt. The pattern to watch for. Do you frequently feel like you're walking on eggshells around this person? Do you often end up apologizing just to end an uncomfortable situation, even when you're not sure what you're apologizing for? Do their emotional reactions seem disproportionate to the situation? These are red flags waving directly in front of you. But emotional manipulation and guilt induction are just two tools in a much larger toolkit. The next sign is perhaps even more difficult to detect because it feels like the exact opposite of manipulation. Sign 3. The excessive charm offensive. This might surprise you, but one of the most reliable indicators that someone is manipulating you is that they're almost too nice, too charming, too interested in you, at least initially. Psychologists call this love bombing, and it's not limited to romantic relationships. It happens in friendships, in workplace dynamics, and in family systems. The principle is simple. Overwhelm someone with attention, affection, and validation to create dependency and lower their defenses. Dr. Dale Archer, a psychiatrist and expert in personality disorders, explains that excessive charm serves a specific strategic purpose. It creates what he calls a validation addiction. When someone showers you with unprecedented levels of attention and makes you feel more seen, more understood, more special than you've ever felt before, your brain releases dopamine and oxytocin, the same neurochemicals associated with addiction and bonding. Here's what this looks like in practice. You meet someone new. Within days or weeks, they're telling you that you're different from everyone else they've ever met. They mirror your interests with uncanny precision. They remember every detail you share. They text you constantly. They make grand gestures. They introduce you to their world quickly and intensely. It feels incredible. It feels like you finally found your person, whether that's a friend, a partner, or a mentor. But then something shifts. Once you're sufficiently invested, once you've reorganized your life around this relationship, the charm doesn't disappear entirely, but it becomes conditional. Suddenly, you have to earn the warmth that used to flow freely. The attention that was constant now comes and goes unpredictably. And you find yourself doing more and more to get back to that initial feeling, to recapture the high of being so completely valued. This is intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same psychological principle that makes gambling addictive. B.F. Skinner's famous experiments with pigeons demonstrated that unpredictable rewards create stronger behavioral patterns than consistent rewards. When you never know when the next hit of validation is coming, you keep performing the behaviors that might trigger it. You become easier to control. A former corporate executive named Michael described his experience with a new boss who used exactly this technique. In the first month, his boss praised him constantly, took him to expensive lunches, and told him he was being fast-tracked for promotion. Michael worked harder than ever, staying late, taking on extra projects. Then the praise stopped, the lunches ended. When Michael asked about the promotion, his boss seemed confused, as if that conversation had never happened. Michael spent the next year desperately trying to recapture that initial approval, working unsustainable hours, neglecting his health and family. He later realized the charm offensive was never about recognizing his talent. It was about extracting maximum productivity. Research from Harvard Business School found that employees who experienced this pattern of initial excessive praise followed by withdrawal worked an average of 15 hours more per week than those with consistent management styles, and their job satisfaction was significantly lower. They were working more and feeling worse. That's the goal of manipulation: extraction without reciprocation. The warning sign here is disproportionate intensity early in any relationship. Genuine connection builds gradually. Manipulation rushes intimacy because it needs you dependent before you have time to think critically. And speaking of thinking critically, the next sign specifically targets your ability to trust your own judgment. Sign 4, the reality distortion field. Imagine this scenario. You distinctly remember a conversation where someone promised to do something. When the deadline passes and they haven't done it, you bring it up. But instead of apologizing or explaining, they look at you with genuine confusion and say, "That conversation never happened. I think you're misremembering. You know what you heard. You're certain." But they're so convincing, so calm, so specific in their denial that you start to doubt yourself. Maybe you did misunderstand. Maybe your memory is playing tricks. Maybe you're going crazy. You're not crazy. You're being gaslighted. The term gaslighting comes from a 1944 psychological thriller where a husband manipulates his wife into questioning her sanity. But Dr. Robin Stern, psychologist and author of The Gaslight Effect, has documented how this manipulation tactic has become disturbingly common in everyday relationships. Gaslighting works by systematically undermining your trust in your own perception, memory, and judgment. It's not about winning an argument, it's about destabilizing your sense of reality itself. Because once you don't trust your own mind, you become completely dependent on the manipulator to tell you what's real. The technique involves several specific strategies. First, there's the outright denial of facts. That never happened. You're making things up. I never said that. Second, there's the minimization of your feelings. You're being too sensitive, you're overreacting, you're being dramatic. Third, there's the redirection of blame. If you weren't so forgetful, this wouldn't be confusing. Your memory has always been unreliable. Fourth, there's the deployment of fake concern. I'm worried about you. You've been very confused lately. Neuroscience research reveals why this is so effective. Our memories are far more malleable than we like to believe. Every time we recall a memory, we're actually reconstructing it. And that reconstruction can be influenced by suggestion. When someone confidently contradicts our memory, especially someone we trust, it creates cognitive dissonance, a deeply uncomfortable mental state. Our brains want to resolve this discomfort, and sometimes the path of least resistance is to accept their version of events. A woman named Jennifer described her experience in a friendship that gradually became abusive. Her friend would make plans, then cancel last minute. When Jennifer expressed frustration, her friend would insist that Jennifer had misunderstood, that the plans were always tentative, that Jennifer was being unreasonably demanding. This happened repeatedly. Jennifer started keeping text messages as proof. But when she showed them to her friend, the response was, "The fact that you feel the need to document our friendship shows how paranoid you've become." Notice the technique. Evidence of manipulation is reframed as evidence of the victim's mental instability. Clinical studies on gaslighting victims show that prolonged exposure to this manipulation creates symptoms similar to PTSD, hypervigilance, anxiety, difficulty making decisions, and a persistent sense of confusion. Victims often describe feeling like they are walking through fog or losing their mind. The warning signs. Do you frequently question your own memory around this person? Do you feel like you need to document conversations to prove what was said? Do you find yourself apologizing for bringing up issues because you're probably just remembering wrong? Do you feel chronically confused about what's real in your interactions with them? These aren't signs that you're losing your mind. These are signs that someone is actively working to make you feel that way. But gaslighting, as destructive as it is often used in combination with other techniques. And the next one might be the most subtle of all. Sign 5, the isolation artist. One of the most dangerous things a manipulator can do is separate you from the people who might help you see clearly. And they rarely do this obviously. They don't typically say, "I forbid you from seeing your friends." Instead, they use a gradual, almost invisible process that makes isolation feel like your own choice. Dr. Christine Louise de Canonville, a psychologist specializing in narcissistic abuse, identifies isolation as a critical stage in establishing control. Why? Because external perspectives are dangerous to manipulators. Your friends and family members who aren't under the manipulator's influence might notice the red flags you're too close to see. They might point out the inconsistencies, the controlling behaviors, the emotional abuse. So the manipulator needs to neutralize those outside voices. Here's how the isolation process typically unfolds. It starts with subtle criticism of the people in your life. Your best friend seems kind of negative, don't you think? Your sister is always causing drama. Your co-workers don't really appreciate you like they should. These comments are planted carefully. The manipulator doesn't demand you cut these people off. They just plant seeds of doubt. Next comes the creation of conflict. The manipulator might pick fights right before you're supposed to meet friends, making you late or upset and ruining the interaction. They might schedule competing events, forcing you to choose between them and others. They might be subtly cold or rude when your loved ones are around, creating tension that makes gatherings uncomfortable. Then comes the positioning of themselves as your only true ally. Nobody understands you like I do. Your family doesn't really get who you are. I'm the only one who truly has your back. This message gets reinforced during moments of vulnerability, when you're more susceptible to believing it. A young man named David shared his experience of this pattern. When he started dating someone new, she seemed perfect, but she frequently commented that his friends were immature and a bad influence. When he'd make plans with them, she'd become sad and withdrawn, not forbidding him from going, but making him feel guilty for choosing them over her. Gradually, to avoid the conflict and the guilt, David stopped reaching out to his friends. Within a year, his entire social world consisted of his girlfriend and her friends. When the relationship became abusive, he felt he had nowhere to turn. His friends had stopped reaching out after he'd cancelled on them so many times. He was completely isolated, exactly as she'd planned. Research from the National Domestic Violence Hotline found that isolation is present in over 90% of abusive relationships. But isolation isn't limited to romantic contexts. Toxic managers isolate employees by creating an us versus them mentality. Manipulative friends isolate by creating drama with other friends until they're your only close relationship. Controlling family members isolate by guilting you for spending time with anyone outside the family system. The psychological impact of isolation is severe. Studies show that socially isolated individuals are significantly more vulnerable to manipulation, depression, and anxiety. They lose access to reality-checking mechanisms. They have no one to validate their experiences or perceptions. They become entirely dependent on the manipulator for social connection and validation. Warning signs. Has your social circle significantly shrunk since this person entered your life? Do you frequently cancel plans with others to avoid conflict with this person? Does this person speak negatively about the important people in your life? Do you feel like you have to hide parts of your other relationships from them? Do you feel anxious about mentioning spending time with others? These patterns aren't accidents, they are strategic. And isolation works especially well in combination with the next sign, which targets something even more fundamental, your sense of self. Sign 6, the identity eroder. Who are you? It seems like a simple question, but manipulators understand that identity is far more fragile than most people realize. And if they can destabilize your sense of self, they can rebuild you into someone more useful to them. Dr. Alexandra Stein, a researcher on coercive control and cultic relationships, describes a process called identity disruption. This happens when someone systematically undermines your beliefs about yourself, your values, your preferences, and your goals, replacing them with versions that serve the manipulator's agenda. This is extraordinarily subtle. It starts with small redirections. You mention you're thinking about taking a class in something that interests you. The manipulator responds with, "That doesn't really seem like you. You've never been interested in that before." You express an opinion about something. They respond with, "That's surprising. You usually think differently about these things." Over time, these small corrections accumulate. You start second-guessing your own interests, opinions, and desires. The manipulator then offers an alternative identity, one that conveniently aligns with what they need from you. You're at your best when you're supporting others, not chasing your own ambitions. You're naturally more of a follower than a leader. You're too sensitive for that kind of environment. These statements aren't observations, they're prescriptions. They're attempts to define who you are in ways that make you more manageable. A particularly cruel version of this involves intermittently validating and invalidating the same trait. One day, your ambition is admirable. The next day, it's selfish. One day, your emotionality is beautiful and authentic. The next day, it's unstable and problematic. This inconsistency prevents you from developing a stable sense of self. You become whoever they need you to be in any given moment, constantly shape-shifting to earn the validation that might or might not come. A woman named Rachel described how her business partner gradually eroded her professional identity. Rachel had started their company with a clear vision and strong leadership instincts, but her partner regularly questioned her decisions, often in front of employees. Rachel's having one of her impulsive moments, she'd say with a laugh, even when Rachel was making carefully considered choices. Over 2 years, Rachel stopped trusting her own judgment. She deferred every decision to her partner. She'd lost not just her confidence, but her sense of who she was as a professional. When she finally left the partnership, it took years of therapy to rebuild her identity and trust her own instincts again. Psychological research on identity and self-concept shows that we form our sense of self partly through reflected appraisals, how we believe others see us. When someone we trust or depend on consistently reflects back a distorted image of who we are, that distortion can become internalized. We start to see ourselves through their eyes rather than our own. The warning signs. Do you feel like you've changed significantly since this relationship began and not in ways you chose? Do you frequently say, I used to be more before? Do you struggle to remember what you actually want versus what this person wants for you? Do you feel like you're performing a version of yourself rather than being yourself? Do your values seem to have shifted to align perfectly with theirs? These are signs that your identity is being actively eroded and replaced. But perhaps the most sophisticated manipulation technique of all is one that makes you feel like everything happening is not only your choice, but your fault. Sign 7. The responsibility reversal. Let's talk about the moment when manipulation becomes most obvious, yet somehow also most effective. This is when the manipulator does something clearly wrong, hurtful, or inappropriate, and somehow by the end of the conversation, you're taking responsibility for their behavior. This is what psychologists call responsibility reversal or DARVO. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Dr. Jennifer Freyd, a psychologist at the University of Oregon, coined this term to describe a specific pattern where perpetrators of wrongdoing not only deny and attack, but actually position themselves as the victim while casting the actual victim as the offender. Here's how this plays out in real time. Someone breaks a commitment to you. You bring it up calmly. Instead of acknowledging their mistake, they respond with, "The fact that you're attacking me about this shows you never really trusted me in the first place." Notice what just happened. The issue was their broken commitment, but now the issue is your lack of trust. The topic has been completely switched. You're now defending your character instead of addressing their behavior. Or consider this scenario. Someone speaks to you disrespectfully in front of others. When you tell them it hurt your feelings, they respond, "If you weren't so insecure, you wouldn't be heard by honest feedback." Again, the responsibility has shifted. The problem is no longer their disrespect. The problem is your insecurity. You caused your own pain by being too sensitive to their perfectly reasonable behavior. This technique is devastatingly effective because it exploits something beautiful about human nature. Our capacity for self-reflection. Healthy people, when confronted with the possibility that they've done something wrong, examine their behavior. They consider whether the criticism might be valid. Manipulators know this. They weaponize your willingness to take accountability. Dr. George Simon notes that this is one of the clearest distinctions between neurotic individuals and manipulative individuals. Neurotics blame themselves excessively, even for things that aren't their fault. Manipulators never accept blame, even for things that clearly are their fault. When these two types interact, you get a predictable pattern. The neurotic person accepts responsibility for everything, while the manipulator accepts responsibility for nothing. A man named Thomas described his experience with a manipulative business partner. Whenever Thomas raised concerns about the partner's behavior, missing meetings, misrepresenting information to clients, making unilateral decisions, the partner would respond with a variation of, "Your need to control everything is going to destroy this business." Thomas would then spend hours wondering if he was being too controlling, if he was the problem. It took an outside consultant pointing out the pattern for Thomas to realize. Raising legitimate concerns about unethical behavior isn't controlling, it's responsible. But his partner had successfully made him question his own judgment every single time. Linguistic analysis of manipulative conversations reveals specific phrases that signal responsibility reversal. "You made me do this. If you hadn't pushed me, I wouldn't have reacted that way. You're just as bad as I am. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? The real issue is your reaction, not my action." Each of these statements shifts blame from the person who acted to the person who responded. The psychological impact is profound. Over time, victims of chronic responsibility reversal develop what researchers call hyper-responsibility. They believe everything is their fault. They apologize compulsively. They cannot set boundaries because they've been trained to believe that any negative consequence that follows a boundary is their responsibility. They've internalized the manipulator's message. Your needs cause problems. Your feelings create conflict. You are the problem. Warning signs. Do you frequently apologize for bringing up issues? When you're upset about something this person did, do conversations somehow end with them being upset at you? Do you find yourself explaining and justifying your feelings more than they ever acknowledge their actions? Do you feel like addressing problems causes more problems than it solves? These patterns indicate that responsibility is being systematically reversed. The hidden truth/dark side. 24 minutes to 27 minutes. Now that you understand these 7 signs, there's something darker we need to discuss. Something that most psychology videos skip over because it's uncomfortable to acknowledge. Not all manipulation is conscious, and that makes it infinitely more complicated to address. Research from the University of Amsterdam studied what they called unconscious manipulators, people who employ these tactics without deliberate awareness that they're doing so. These individuals often learn these behaviors in childhood as survival mechanisms in dysfunctional family systems. Guilt tripping, gaslighting, and responsibility reversal weren't evil strategies they chose. They were adaptive responses to chaotic or neglectful environments. And those responses became so deeply ingrained that they now deploy them automatically without conscious intent. Does this make the manipulation less harmful? Absolutely not. The impact on victims is identical whether the manipulator is consciously strategic or unconsciously repeating learned patterns. Your pain doesn't care about their intentions. But it does complicate the moral landscape because it means that someone you love might be manipulating you and genuinely not realize they're doing it. It means that confronting them might be met with authentic confusion and defensiveness rather than calculated denial. Dr. Martha Stout, author of The Sociopath Next Door, makes a critical distinction that's worth understanding. She estimates that approximately 4% of the population has antisocial personality disorder. These are the conscious, strategic manipulators who lack empathy and view others purely as objects to be used. But a much larger percentage of the population engages in manipulative behaviors without meeting criteria for a personality disorder. They're wounded people who learn dysfunctional ways of getting their needs met. Here's why this matters. It determines how you respond. With a conscious manipulator, someone who knows exactly what they're doing and continues anyway, the only effective response is usually to exit the relationship entirely. They will not change because from their perspective, their tactics work perfectly. Why would they change a strategy that consistently gets them what they want? But with an unconscious manipulator, someone who's repeating learned patterns without awareness, there's sometimes a possibility of change. If, and this is crucial, they're willing to develop self-awareness and do the difficult work of changing those patterns. Most won't. Change is painful and it requires admitting you've been harmful, even unintentionally. But some will, especially if they genuinely value the relationship and are confronted with clear evidence of their behavior. The hard truth is that you cannot fix, heal, or change a manipulator. That's not your job. Your job is to protect yourself, recognize the patterns, and make informed decisions about which relationships serve your well-being and which ones undermine it. And there's one more dark reality we need to address. Recognizing these signs in others might lead you to recognize them in yourself. That's not a comfortable realization, but it's a valuable one. Self-awareness is the beginning of change. If you see yourself in some of these behaviors, if you recognize patterns you've used to control or influence others, that recognition is the first step towards becoming someone who influences without manipulating, who persuades without coercing, who builds relationships based on respect rather than control. The hidden truth about manipulation is that it's a spectrum, not a binary. We've all used some of these tactics at some point, usually in moments of desperation or fear. The question isn't whether you've ever been manipulative. The question is this your consistent pattern? And are you willing to change it? Practical application. So you recognize the signs. You see the patterns in a relationship that matters to you. Now what? Here are 5 practical steps you can take immediately. First, start documenting. Your memory is fallible, especially when someone is actively trying to distort it. Keep a private journal of conversations, promises made, and concerning behaviors. This isn't about building a legal case. It's about preserving your own sanity. When someone tells you a conversation never happened, you can check your notes. This external record prevents gaslighting from taking root. Second, establish and enforce boundaries using a specific technique called the broken record. When you set a boundary and a manipulator pushes back, don't engage with their reasoning. Simply repeat your boundary calmly and consistently. I understand you're disappointed, but I won't be available this weekend. They counter. You respond. I hear you and I won't be available this weekend. No justification, no elaborate explanation, just calm repetition. This technique neutralizes guilt tripping because you're not giving them material to work with. Third, expand your support system intentionally. If you recognize that you've been isolated, actively rebuild connections. Reach out to old friends, join groups related to your interests. Cultivate relationships outside the manipulator's influence. This serves 2 purposes. It gives you perspective and reality checking, and it reduces your dependency on the manipulator for social connection. Fourth, practice something called the gray rock technique when dealing with someone you can't immediately remove from your life, like a co-worker or co-parent. Be boring. Be neutral. Provide minimal information. Don't share your emotions, your plans, your vulnerabilities. Manipulators feed on emotional reactions and personal information. If you become uninteresting and unreactive, you become less useful to manipulate. You're not worth the effort. Fifth, and this is perhaps most important, trust your gut. Your body often recognizes manipulation before your mind does. That feeling of walking on eggshells, that's your nervous system detecting danger. That knot in your stomach before interacting with this person, that's information. That chronic confusion, that's a symptom. Stop dismissing these signals as you being too sensitive or overthinking. Your instincts are trying to protect you. Listen to them. And here's a bonus step that's uncomfortable but necessary. Be prepared to lose the relationship. Sometimes when you stop being controllable, manipulators will discard you themselves. Other times, enforcing boundaries will end the relationship. This might hurt, you might grieve. But a relationship that only exists when you're being controlled isn't a relationship. It's a transaction. And you deserve actual human connection based on mutual respect, not strategic manipulation. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus said something remarkably relevant to everything we've discussed today. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. But I'd add a modern corollary. We should also have 2 eyes to watch people's patterns and 1 mouth to speak our boundaries. Manipulation thrives in silence and isolation. It grows in the gaps where you doubt yourself, where you prioritize being nice over being safe, where you mistake peacemaking for peacekeeping. The moment you start seeing these patterns clearly, the moment you trust your perception more than someone else's distortion, manipulation loses its power. You are not responsible for managing someone else's emotions. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You are not obligated to tolerate mistreatment because someone has convinced you that their needs are more important than your dignity. The people who genuinely love you will respect your boundaries. They will take accountability when they hurt you. They will celebrate your growth, not feel threatened by it. They will support your other relationships, not isolate you from them. They will make you feel more like yourself, not less. That's the difference between connection and control. If this video resonated with you, if you recognized patterns in your own life, I want you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel because understanding human behavior and protecting yourself from manipulation is an ongoing journey, not a single destination. Then leave a comment with just 1 word, aware. That single word tells me this video did what it was designed to do. It opened your eyes to something you couldn't see before, and it tells other viewers that they're not alone in what they've experienced. Your awareness is your power. Use it wisely. And remember, the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. Protect it fiercely.